happy third birthday to Conservatives for Liberty. I'm told at 3 years old you're supposed to be a shrieking, screaming toddler who refuses to put up with the world as you see it and rebels against everything it finds that it doesn't like, and I'd encourage you to act exactly like that in the months and the years to come. Look, it's great to be here amongst a group of similarly ostracised people from the libertarian right. I want to give a few thoughts about some of the depressing trends in modern British politics, but I also want to give you some food for thought about, I think, some optimistic trends that could emerge. I was as horrified as anybody else when I saw the day before Theresa May's speech the criticism of the libertarian right. Her precise words were as follows: government can and should be a force of good. Should be, I agree with. The state exists to provide what individual people, communities and markets cannot. We should employ the power of government for the good of the people. Time to reject the ideological templates provided by the socialist left and the libertarian right and embrace a new centre ground in which government steps up and not back to act on behalf of the people. Government stepping up and not back to act on behalf of the people is pretty much the socialist left, actually. That's not obviously the new centre ground. So I think these words were unfortunate. I think they were, however, to some considerable degree, simple political posturing. I don't believe that Theresa May has stumbled across a great new coherent political philosophy, theory or ideology. I think this was entirely about positioning electoral politics and attempting to take advantage of the fact that we appear to have ambled into being a one-party state, which is conclusive proof that even in a free market competitive structure such as electoral politics, you can actually sometimes stumble across natural monopolies. And it seems to me the Conservative Party is potentially a natural monopoly. So I don't think we should worry too much about the precise wording. I don't think that it's entirely true to suggest that this is a coherent, brave, bold or understandable new approach from the Conservatives. But there have been a good number of policy announcements and suggestions which are concerning and do suggest a rather more statist approach from the British government than those of us of a free market capitalist persuasion would want. When I saw Theresa May's speech and those words, I summed up her new philosophy as saying that she seemingly wants to chart a middle road between sensible free market policies that work and stupid socialist policies that don't. And there are a range of policies that I think are probably a bit closer to stupid socialism rather than sensible free market reform. The first of those, and I can remember when she became Prime Minister and the shape of the new cabinet was unfolding, and I felt quite optimistic about it from sort of mid-morning to about lunchtime. And then it got progressively worse and worse and worse. And I was holding out hope against hope that she was actually finally going to have the guts to abolish the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills. Could clearly be scrapped. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous that the UK government has a Department of Business, Innovation and Skills. And I've always said, if you wanted to list 3 things that the UK government is worse at, it is probably business, innovation and skills. However, I was corrected when it was pointed out to me, no, Mark, it's probably culture, media and sport. So those are 2 departments that in my view could have gone, but with biz, worse than that. This was no longer going to be the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills. Fortunately, we closed down DEC, so I think we're now looking at sort of energy as a priority rather than windmills as a priority for the country. But industrial strategy is going to be embedded into this department. And that sends shivers down my spine, industrial strategy. If you want to see an economic approach that has been tried and failed, specifically in the United Kingdom, industrial strategy pretty much sums it up. So come back, all is forgiven, the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills, because I prefer that to a department that's focusing on industrial strategy. We don't yet know what that industrial strategy will be. The industrial strategy is to make Britain a place in which commerce is easy, lightly regulated and lightly taxed. 3 cheers for that. But my fear is that we will actually be getting back to the man in Whitehall knows best. And these are strategic industries that need support, and these are industries that don't need support. That we will have politicians deciding, for example, that propping up Tata Steel in Port Talbot is a great necessity, but propping up British home stores is not. And I don't want politicians making those judgments. So that is a retrograde step, and one that I think Conservatives for Liberty need to keep a close watch on. Again, a bit like the mid-morning from the Cabinet reshuffle to the late afternoon, I punched the air when I heard that Hinkley Point was going to be on pause. Oh, blimey, excellent. This ludicrous project is going to be kicked into the long grass again. Sadly, the play button has been hit again there. I held out hope against hope that now was actually the chance to bury HS2, an absolutely useless project. I'm pretty sceptical about all government infrastructure spending. I don't think it yields results. If forced to spend in the state sector £1 on infrastructure or £1 on consumption, I'd probably spend it on infrastructure, but I don't think the government's very good at creating infrastructure. And the comparison I always use is that the Indian government spent about $150 million on an infrastructure project to get to Mars. And the May government is going to spend about $100 billion on an infrastructure project to get to Birmingham. So if you are actually in favour of government infrastructure projects, probably the Indians have got better value for money. And then we've heard quite a lot about intervention in corporate governance, that the government of the UK knows better what shareholders want, what the balance of the board should be, what the ratio should be between the lowest paid and the highest paid and the rest of it. That worries me. And then finally, to keep up the depressing meme of the first my opening remarks, drift on deficit reduction. Now, it's not going to radically change the amount of government spending because the cuts made by the last government were vastly, vastly overstated. The cuts of the last government in real terms were about 0.5% per annum. The sort of cuts that companies have to make at the stroke of a pen, and indeed the private sector has had to make in many areas since the financial crash of 2008. I mean, worth applauding them with one hand. I think it is the first government in anybody's lifetime that has actually managed to cut expenditure in the United Kingdom, but modestly so, and at a painful pace, a painfully slow pace, and a painfully slow pace that is now not even going to be kept up. So now closing off the deficit, stopping adding to the national debt, which was initially going to be delivered by 2015 and then by 2020, is being kicked still further down the road. If we ever get to the stage where we have a balanced budget, we would have been running budget deficits for over 20 years. And my fear now is when the day arrives, let's say 2025, that the government is not spending any more than it is bringing in tax receipts. There might be a sense of, oh, mission accomplished. We can now return to the good old days of throwing money around, rather than that this needs to be the new norm. And I'll give you a preview of some of IEA research, a major project we've done on taxation and growth that will come out next week, in which we try and look at the evidence of what should be the overall government tax take in the economy if you want to maximise growth, maximise welfare, or even to be sustainable. And it is pretty clear that the government cannot take and spend any more than 38% of GDP sustainably. You can do it 1 year, 2 years, probably not for as many as 20. We're still at 46% after what's apparently been 6 years of austerity. All of that, very disappointing, bad news. And groups like Conservatives for Liberty and my own think tank, the IEA, need to keep a beady eye on that and win the debate against the government's instincts for intervention. But I think there are some reasons to be optimistic as well. It is true that Theresa May in her speech did say that Conservatives all believe in capitalism and free markets, and it strikes me that the battle for ideas within the Conservative Party, that Conservatives for Liberty and others are fighting, are essentially between the capitalism but crowd, in which I would put the Prime Minister, and the capitalism yes crowd, in which I would put Conservatives for Liberty. Now, the upside here is both sides are still broadly on the side of capitalism, right? But the capitalism yes crowd, I think, needs to come out and win, and I think you can win that battle of ideas within your party. And there's one area in which I think Theresa May is onto something, not just about electoral politics, but about winning hearts and minds. And that's the left behind voters, and often talked about demographic, considered to have contributed substantially to the Leave vote at the referendum. And I think Theresa May, in both substance and style, both are important, is right that those who believe in free market capitalism need to explain how it helps the poor, not merely that it is in aggregate a beneficial economic system and the best that mankind has ever found, but how it actually helps those at the bottom of the ladder. And if improving the status of, let's say, the bottom 20% in income terms in British society is going to be a core aim and a keystone of this government, I think you guys and the IEA can put forward a load of ideas that it would be foolish for the May government to dismiss. I think in the area of planning reform and house prices, we need to have a proper free market approach to house building. It is utterly ridiculous that state regulations and restrictions make it nearly impossible for a single blade of grass to die in vain in order for any housing of any meaningful import to be built. It is utterly ridiculous in the UK how state restrictions on supply have led to housing skyrocketing. And the ratio you should be looking at here is, roughly speaking, the ratio between the median, the average wage in a given area, and the cost of an average house. Of course, property prices are different all across the world and the Western world, and radically different right across the United Kingdom. But that's what you should be looking at in terms of affordability. How much does it cost? How many multiples of the average income in an area do you need to earn to buy a house outright? And in the UK, that ratio is about 7 or 8. And in some areas of London, 11 or 12. You would need to earn 12 times the average salary. You need to have that amount of money to buy a house outright. That is ludicrous compared to the rest of the Western world, where the ratio is typically around 3. So in relative terms, it is more expensive to live in Warrington than it is to live in Washington, DC. It is more expensive to live in Swansea than it is to live in Seattle. And it is far more expensive to live in Newark than it is to live in New Orleans. This is completely crazy and is a reflection of statist intervention and the choking off of private housing supply in the market. I think you guys should be beating that drum, and that is a policy that frankly isn't good for me as someone who bought a flat in Battersea 14 years ago. But you don't need to worry about me, I'm just about well enough off anyway. That is a policy that would greatly help the poor and the young. I think another area that those of a free market liberal bent need to start banging on about are taxes on sin. Tobacco, alcohol, sugar, and the rest. And I think there is a tendency for libertarians, and as someone who is a compulsive drinker, smoker, and gambler, I know a tendency to argue that, you know, it is my sort of God-given or my natural right to do what I want, and why the hell should the government penalise me for my lifestyle choices? And I think that is a perfectly coherent, legitimate, and proud libertarian argument. I'm not totally sure, however, that that's the way we will win the battle. I think that we need to win the battle by arguing that these sin taxes are an attack on the poor and the working class.
Yeah.
And in the number of times I've done radio or television debates about minimum unit pricing of alcohol, taxes going up on cigarettes, sugar taxes, all the rest of it, the one bit that really gets the lefty statists riled up is when you say to them, why are you picking on the poor? Why are you picking on the poor? I've got no doubt that you mean great intentions for people's health, but your policy will disproportionately hit the poor. Fortunately, at least in England, less so in Scotland, the mad ideas to have a minimum unit pricing of alcohol have been rolled back. But rather than, I think, arguing from a theoretical point of view that we should sort of not have that intervention in the marketplace, I think we should argue from the point of view of the poor. If you are part of the rich, liberal, metropolitan elite, quaffing your Chateau Neuf de Pape every night, the minimum unit pricing of alcohol does not affect you. If you are on a thin salary, looking forward to a 6-pack of Carlsberg Special on a Friday, it will. This is class war against the working class, and free market liberals should be defending those who are being crushed, I think, by the nanny state tendencies. It is an attack on the poor, and I think we should start to use those arguments about where the burden falls. In some IEA research, we looked at sin taxes, which we very broadly covered as tobacco, alcohol, petrol. And if you look at the lowest 20% of the population, about 37% of their income goes in paying for sin taxes. Not even the bloody product itself, right? Just the taxes on the product, 37%. If you smoke an average number of cigarettes, drink an average amount of alcohol and drive an average car an average distance. For the top 20%, about 15% of their income. These are regressive taxes that hit the poor the hardest. I think that we should be arguing for that. Brexit is going to dominate pretty much everything for pretty much evermore. I don't think anybody yet knows how the deal is going to pan out. I think that we need to get away from debates about hard Brexit and soft Brexit and start framing it as either a clean Brexit or a messy Brexit. And it seems to me that a clean Brexit and a clean break and understanding what the new rules would be, which we could then negotiate away, is a better approach than wondering whether we can stay in an associate membership status or some such like. So I would say just leave, fall back on the WTO rules and try and negotiate those rules away. But there are going to be some changes domestically that I think we are going to need to think about quite hard as a consequence of Brexit. And they are not directly related to leaving the European Union. They are things that we could and probably should have done anyway, but perhaps now become more pronounced in political debate. Let me give you an example. I'd be going on for hours if I got into the details of the immigration debate. But you will notice, and a number of you will have heard me say this before, that whenever there is a concern about numbers around immigration, the argument goes something like this. Our hospitals can't cope with the influx of people. Our school system can't cope with all of the youngsters coming in. Our road network can't cope, and our transport networks can't cope with this flood of people coming in. You'll notice that those things all have one thing in common. They are all run by the state. You will never ever hear a supermarket complaining that it has too many customers. Not once. Tesco's have not said, God, where are all this pub doesn't complain that there are too many foreigners trying to buy beer. The bits that can't cope are in the state sector, and particularly around state welfare. And I would have liked, whether we were in the EU or not, Britain to have a much more contributory welfare system. And I think Brexit makes that a much more likely outcome. We are not just going to have a big pot of state money and that you get handouts when you roll up at the gates or the hospital or whatever. We're going to have some sort of personalised savings accounts. And I think in terms of tackling immigration, our doors should essentially be open to people who are going to be net beneficiaries to the UK economy. And I don't think it's that difficult to design a system that establishes that. It could either be that people are allowed in if they have a guaranteed salary of X. It could either be that if your guaranteed salary of a job is a little less than that, that doesn't matter, but you're not going to get NHS provision for 5 years until you've paid your taxes, your kids aren't going to be able to go to state schools, you aren't going to qualify for housing benefit and the rest. I think Brexit and some of the rather tortured arguments about immigration provide a great opportunity to begin to bring some market principles to our absolutely outmoded and overspending welfare system. Open for business. God, it's the next bloody time I hear a politician saying that. This has replaced hard-working families. God, irritating term that politicians use. There's quite a lot of voters who are unmarried, lazy, idle people like me. I don't know if the political party stands up for us. It's all hard-working families. Open for business, I think we need to give a very, very clear steer to politicians of all stripes, including those in the government, that if you say it, you have to mean it. And although I in part welcome the airport decision today, eventually we have actually reached a position in which there is a nod to the fact that we might actually eventually get round to laying down a small piece of tarmac somewhere in southeast England to facilitate international commerce and business. It was still a rather feeble decision. We should have greenlit everything. It is absolutely ridiculous that the decision today has actually been to block Gatwick expanding, which they're willing to do so entirely on their own dime. Why on earth would we block that move? Okay, one step in the right direction. If we are serious about being open for business, that means an awful lot more air travel and a few less toy trains going up to Birmingham and back for £100 billion of taxpayers' money. So I think Brexit provides an opportunity for us to radically change the way welfare works, for us to have a serious approach to immigration that does actually allow free movement of talent. And very often you hear people merging together the free movement of people and the free movement of labour. Those are rather different things. The free movement of labour, I think, is extremely important. And if we are going to be open for business, let's make sure we slash regulation, taxes and the rest. If there was one thing, and I'm not even sure there was, but if there was one thing that the Remain campaign and the Leave campaign basically agreed about in the referendum, it was that there was a lot of pointless red tape coming from Brussels. The Leave campaign said, so there's another reason to leave. And the Remain campaign said, yes, it is completely irritating and annoying and boring, but it's just about worth it in order for what they saw as the other benefits of being in the EU. But both sides were agreed there was an awful lot of nonsense in red tape and regulation. Pretty much unanimity on that point. So let's insist that the Great Repeal Bill, so-called, which is going to translate all EU regulations and directives into English law, has a time bomb put in it, a sunset clause, in which the default assumption will be it all dies in 5 or 10 years' time. And I'm delighted that Grant Shapps is actually proposing exactly that amendment. Given everybody agreed that regulation was too high and too heavy, we now have a glorious opportunity to remedy that. But we have to get it right. If you enshrine all of these ludicrous EU regulations into British law, and you are relying on Sir Humphrey Appleby to methodically work through and repeal those in the years ahead, you are going to be very, very disappointed. So let's make sure that the burden of proof changes and that these people need to justify each and every line and pass it through Parliament if they wish to retain it into the 2020s, rather than assume that we wish to. So my message to you on your 3rd birthday is to keep up the good work, be positive about what free market capitalism can bring. Don't be afraid to be constructively critical of idiotic government decisions. There will be a good number of them. But seize the day and the opportunities that Brexit and the huge change in our political system and likely our economy is going to bring about in 2 or 3 years' time. Pragmatism, which seems to be really the ideology of the present government, in my view, pragmatism doesn't work. What works is having a vision and a view of where you want the world to be, and often slowly and painstakingly taking a step at a time to get there. So congratulations to you guys for the slow, painstaking, sometimes painful but useful progress you've made in the next 3 years, and let's double down in the 3 years ahead in order to make sure that we have a government of whatever stripe, Conservative or otherwise, that is actually going to make Britain the greatest free market, liberal trading nation on earth. Thanks for your attention.